So the sergeant hung up the phone, called me back in, and pulled out his Miranda card and read me my Miranda rights.
Right.
And then said, did everything you tell me before still apply now? And I was stunned, but I said yes. And he said, okay, get out.
I don't think that's quite how that's supposed to go.
That is not. But I'll tell you, Jared, that incident and that one part of what happened resonated with me as I moved up the ranks to sergeant, lieutenant, captain. And so I had probably 4 or 5 officer-involved shootings that I personally responded to. And it gave me insight into the mind of the officer involved and the procedures and a human aspect, and to be very careful in the follow-up and not be that sergeant who did that with me.
Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. This podcast exists so that cops can hear encouragement from other cops. You might not talk directly to a police chaplain, but I'm hoping that you might listen to a chaplain talk to other cops about being a wiser, healthier person. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain are giving you the wisdom gleaned from their experience so that you don't have to learn the hard way. Today, we continue our conversation with Jim Dudley from San Francisco. Jim was involved in an officer-involved shooting as a patrolman in which he and his partner were nearly killed. We talk about how that incident has influenced him through the rest of his career and into retirement. We discuss how encouraging preparedness in the next generation is a great mission for older and retired officers. And then we shift to talking about some of the challenges in modern law enforcement and the city of San Francisco specifically. But we only talk about politics for a few moments because I had questions about the movie industry in California and its interaction and influence on law enforcement. Jim is a fellow movie buff, and we talk about TV shows and movies that are set in San Francisco and how that impacted the police department. And Jim weighs in on what he says is the greatest cop TV show ever made. Here's Jim Dudley. Part of the reason I was really eager to talk to you because not only have you had a critical incident, but then you also continued in your career for a long time after, and you were in supervisory roles and in executive leadership, and now you're teaching. And it seems like you might have a better perspective on how things have changed over the last 30 years and, what's still applicable and what's not. So maybe let's start with that. What is exactly the same? Your experience translate exactly over to someone who has a similar experience now. What is always going to be true in a use of force incident for an officer?
Yeah, I think it starts with what the officer's going through immediately after the incident. What's 2 weeks when you're on vacation, or what's 2 weeks when something good is happening to you? It's nothing. It's a blink of an eye. But 2 weeks off post-shooting is an eternity. And all the things that affect the officer, sleepless nights, irritability, second guessing, hearing what people are saying. And people say the weirdest things after an incident like that. In that time period, I really struggled with whether or not I really wanted to continue being a cop. And for me, I'm a Catholic, lifelong Catholic. Now I'm a 9/11 Catholic, right? I go to church when I really need to, or something. There's an emergency. Sorry to say, but I felt the guilt. I felt like maybe I should feel worse than I do. And then you meet with a psychologist, and they have their own thing. And then at some point that officer has to reconcile internally, but still you have all these external things happening, right? You're going through this process. You're being interviewed. You're waiting to be cleared. You're going back for training to make sure that you're not hesitant using your weapon again, that you're clear on all the rules of use of force, talking with your partner, your family, everything else, right? So me as a supervisor, all of those things were on my mind in responding to those cases.
What has become different in the last 30 years, maybe good or bad?
Yeah, so I was just going to there with a peer support plan. We had that in place at the time of my shooting, but immediately after this, one guy came up to me and started asking me all these weird questions, and then I went over to look at the peer support sheet, and he was on it, and I thought we need to do better training for peer support, and I got involved in the program. I became a peer support officer. As I moved up the ranks, I had more involvement, made sure that we were dedicating time and training to those officers. 100% advocate for the psychological support that we got for all officers, not just officers involved in critical incidents. I mean, I'm sure through, your countless responses to crisis that human beings are not built to support, this ongoing repetitive trauma, whether personal through physical encounters or abuse or these kinds of incidents, but also vicarious trauma, interviewing child victims and victims of abuse or sexual assault. I mean, it is real. Your cup gets really full fast. And unless you get some kind of help, it just keeps overflowing. So I've always been an advocate for that throughout my career. We have gotten better. We did appoint a police psychologist, I think a few years after my shooting, not because of my shooting, but we had a police lieutenant who was also a PhD in psychology. And he really, Al Benner, got the project kicked off and moving and really built a good program there where we have so much support now, not only in San Francisco, but across law enforcement with great support systems, employee assistance programs, physical fitness, wellness, nutrition, the emphasis on the importance of sleep, the importance of reduction of alcohol intake if you're so inclined. And now we have apps like Calm for the general public, but we have things like Cortico, a great app for law enforcement, and other apps and we have our national 988 number where if you feel like you're in a crisis or suicidal, you can pick up the phone and start talking to somebody. And there's other great hotlines that they're answered by former law enforcement officers who know what you're talking about.
Copline,
right?
Yeah, Copline. Yep.
1,000% support better now. We have programs to smash the stigma of calling for mental health support. And I think the big drawback remains that cops feel like their identity may be suspended or they'll be drummed out if they ask for help. And it becomes public or gets to the point where they need medication or, we're carrying firearms and we have the authority to deprive people of their freedoms and to use force up to lethal force. So, when we talk about mental health, that's a big concern for cops. And so they think long and hard before they seek help. And unfortunately, some people don't seek help despite all these resources.
If there's something in your law enforcement career that's affecting you in some weird kind of way, and you recognize that this isn't normal and it's bothering you, there's never been a better time to ask for help. There's no guarantee that everyone will respond the way they ought to respond to you. But overall, more people are willing to give you good help and not just throw you away or think less of you. That climate has never been better than it is now, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
You served for 32 years, and now you continue to be involved helping police with your podcasting and your teaching. Why do you keep involved? Why don't you just go fishing somewhere and, ride off into the sunset?
Yes, because, if I stopped, maybe they'd start throwing dirt on top of me. No, I think that that incident crystallized how important it was to be totally invested in training and how to be 100% on board. And I'll tell you, there are great cops out there, great social cops and great hardworking law enforcement cops. And the crossover between those two is, I wouldn't say it's rare, but I mean, you know who those people are when you work with them, right? You can have a beer with them, talk football, movies, have a great time with them. And when they're at work, they're 100% doing their research, keeping up with the changes, the technology, all that, and doing a great job. And so I guess my goal was to make that more prevalent in our profession, to truly be professionals. And I guess it crystallized for me to be an advocate of law enforcement officers, to better prepare them. And I never pushed my own two sons to join the police department. They both joined on their own. One of them, the first one, surprised me when he was in college still, and he came home and told me, hey, I took the test today. I think I did really well. I said, oh, that's great. We were talking. I said, what was the subject? He said, it was the police test. And I was floored. He never told me he applied, never told me he was going to take the test. And he's a great cop, and he's got a great circle of social friends. And my younger son, same thing. If anything, he's more gregarious and just so affable. And I'm so proud of both of them. And they're both great cops too. And so I guess that's what I advocate for. I'm a mentor to a lot of my students. I try to share my experiences in my podcasts, not to brag about them, but to share my experiences. Right. I think too many people in my boat who do retire, they leave and they take all these great experiences with them. And it's a shame. We need to pass that on to the next generation. I'm a big proponent. You've heard me. And I think more of us should do it. I think more of us should pitch in when we can, be mentors, volunteer. Believe me, I don't teach because of the pay. I have a great pension, a great retirement, but I really do enjoy the energy of the students. I do enjoy in the environment we're in now, where there's some indoctrination going on. And when I teach and I tell the students the realities and show them the data, I see so many aha moments where I think I'm converting some to saying, okay, wow, that, he's being neutral as he can, but giving out the data and showing why, for example, there's such huge criticism on law enforcement today about bias and inequality in policing. And we look at, for instance, homicide solvability rates. Mm-hmm. And we look at homicide solvability higher in white and Asian communities, but lower in Black and brown communities. But there's reasons for that. And we can point to technology like ShotSpotter that hears shots, sends dispatch, police car gets there, rounds on the street, maybe a body on the street, and still no one in that community's picked up the phone and called 911. And so when we discuss that in class, it's the responsibility of law enforcement to build community trust too. But you can only reach out so far, and you need to have the other side reach back. Yeah. And in some of those communities, when there's no cooperation, how do you solve a homicide with no evidence, no witness, no license plate, no description, nothing to go on? So, I mean, when we look behind those headlines, there's more to it than these two percentages of solvability rates, and to determine that police just don't care in some of these communities, because that's not the truth.
Yeah. A lot of the narratives today are overly simplistic and prejudiced against law enforcement. And that's ultimately unhelpful, because if you're in trouble, there's only so many places you can call that can actually send help. And so tell me, do you feel optimistic about the students you're seeing now? How do you feel about the future of law enforcement?
I am totally optimistic. I've teamed up with Rob Cate from Interview Now. I've teamed up with Janae Gasparini, a police officer and professor in New York. And we've done presentations on reaching out to Gen Z and changing the way we're training and changing the paradigm of, you asked me at the start of the show, how was it 40 years ago? How did you do it? What kind of training did you get? What kind of force options did you have? We really need to do a paradigm shift to looking at pedagogy from a different standpoint of standing up in front of a classroom and talking for an hour and hoping all the students in the room caught all of it. I mean, multimedia, experiential learning, small group learning, repetition, video, people learn different ways. And we're doing that now. We're trying to get that at police academies. We're appealing to young people who really have a fear of the unknown, right? There's that imposter syndrome that's really prevalent among a lot of our kids, especially since COVID, right? I think COVID was a kick in the gut to a lot of kids that hurt their confidence. And so, here we are 3 years removed from 2020. So if you had a 16-year-old in high school, they're our audience now to get into law enforcement careers, but we've got to make it safe. We've got to demystify it for them. We've got to have them practice a test, run through the physical agility skills test to see what it's like, to feel it, because they're tactile learners, right? Yeah. And so if we do all that, we should be able to stimulate recruitment and retention again. And I think that, I think a lot of people are seeing through some of the mistruths and the fallacies from 2020 and 2021. And I think, more and more you're seeing cities across the nation saying, wait a minute, that defund movement was a bad idea. We're seeing these increases of crime. We're realizing that civilian response isn't cutting it, and it's dangerous for some of them. So let's get back to policing, and let's stick to policing and not try to have police be our do-all, say-all arm of a government. And I think that's the slippery slope, right? When we're dealing with things like homelessness in itself is not a crime. It'd be great to have other agencies like public health and public works and park rec jump in on homeless issues and take cops out of the equation, unless there's, it's a crime involved or violence involved.
Right.
So I think rather than just be the catch-all for government, we need to define police. The community and the legislators need to say what they want us to do, and then give us the tools to do it. And I think you're going to see a rise in policing again.
Yeah, I had been in San Francisco years and years ago, went to Fisherman's Wharf and did all the touristy things. And it was wonderful. This was 35 years ago, probably. And then I came back as an adult with my wife, and we drove, across Golden Gate Bridge and down Lombard, and it's beautiful and neat and unique. But then we turn on Leavenworth Street, and we saw so many people who were bent at the waist, lost, just it was horrible. We saw fecal matter and broken glass and just awful human misery. And my wife wept as we drove through San Francisco, this beautiful city.
Sure.
What do you think can be done with that current crisis?
I think you're starting to see a change in so many people up in arms, and I'm sorry for your experience and your wife especially, but the deterioration is just abominable. And in a city with a $14 billion budget, there's no way that should be. Yeah. But there is, we're a liberal city, and when 1980 we were a liberal city, but now I wouldn't say they're carpetbaggers, but you got all these people from all over coming to San Francisco, getting to be elected officials, to be, quote, progressives. And I don't know why they call them progressive, because we are not going forward.
Regressing. It sure seems like, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the drug trade has been ignored. I was at I've been in a lot of committees where we were looking at policy changes, and we were looking to get people up off the street back in 1999. And we took a model from New York, the Community Justice Center model, and we tried to bring it to San Francisco. And when I talked about what I just said, public health needs to get involved. They need to bring back vans that take these people off the street that can't talk. They're sleeping with their eyes wide open. They're dying. We had 720 overdose deaths in 2020.
Yeah.
Get them off the street and take them to a rehab facility and bring back the ordinance that said if you're like that 3 times within 30 days, then you go to a mandatory restrained clinic. And using compassion as their flag, we've had these progressive politicians say, no, it is their right to be like that on the street. Yeah. And since we've decriminalized drugs, we want drug enforcement to be the lowest priority of the SFPD. That coupled with COVID and defunding and impaneling a police commission and a district attorney who prosecuted cops for doing their job totally demoralized the police department. So calls for service went unanswered. Arrests dropped dramatically. You had a motto by cops that was Fido. I'll spot you the F, but it and drive on.
Yeah.
And so it was like, why get out? Why wrestle with this guy? Use force, and then he dies, or you get brought up on charges, or you get sued.
Yeah. In that environment, why would an officer even attempt to answer most calls? I mean, it just seems like a lose-lose situation.
Yeah. So, I mean, San Francisco, why did we vote in as district attorney the son of literal terrorists?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, his parents were Weather Underground terrorists. And then when they went to prison for killing a guard and shooting officers, he was raised by 2 other members of the Weather Underground. Yeah. And then we voted him in as district attorney under this progressive agenda. And then we got, of 2 years of heavy crack epidemic, he prosecuted, I think, 2 fentanyl cases in 2 years.
Yeah.
And so I was a big proponent of the DA that we have now, and she's, I think, prosecuted almost 500 cases in less than a year. So I think you're seeing a grassroots turnaround, people saying enough with the progressive candidates, but there's a shortage of candidates too. And
well, the people who could step in, many of them have left. Some of them have left all of California.
Right.
So,
along with a large part of the tax base.
Yeah.
If you follow the money, that's when it's really going to hit home that when we lose the tax base and we still have a $14 billion budget, then some severe decisions are going to have to be made. Yeah. And the community-based organizations, the money's just being handed out, no audits, no checking on capacity, no understanding how successful their programs are. It's just handing money out the door of City Hall. But I think people are sick of it. And what you described, that fentanyl overdose where they're literally standing, where they're seconds from tipping over and falling, crashing on the sidewalk. So this public defender who later ran for judge, that'll give you another hint. She told me at a meeting when I suggested that we have public health scoop these people up, that it is everyone's God-given right to lay on the sidewalk in their own urine, feces, and vomit if they want. And I just looked around the table to the rest of the committee, like, are we all there? Are we all in agreement with that?
Wow. Yeah. It's surprising that passes for compassion.
Right.
Mercy.
Yeah. And they point to evidence-based harm reduction programs, and it's failing in Vancouver, where they love to point to the success. And it even failed to a degree in Portugal, which is the king of harm reduction, let them do it programs.
Now for something completely different. So San Francisco is a city that's been featured in a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows.
Yeah.
When you were in executive leadership, there would have been multiple movies and TV shows that showed San Francisco. I'm thinking particularly a kind of detective show called Monk.
Oh, huh.
Yeah. To what degree, when your department is being represented, I mean, that was San Francisco PD that he was supposedly working with, this character, this detective character. To what degree does that help or hurt a department? I mean, how do you guys feel about it? Are you consulted at all on what they're going to put in the TV show and how they're going to represent your city?
The fictionalized version of San Francisco / Vancouver / LA or wherever else they're filming.
Yes.
I mean, the old shows, Streets of San Francisco and Bullet and things like that, I think those were great because or even Dirty Harry, right? The Dirty Harry series. I look at those sometimes and say, hey, that's my office, or I worked in that office. I mean, they're real scenes. And then you get the Nash Bridges where, it's Miami Vice in San Francisco and, half of it's not even filmed here.
Yeah.
Who cares? But I mean, the ones where, and Monk, comedy / mystery show.
Right.
I ran into them filming in Chinatown one day and I had a chat with the guy who played, I guess it was his lieutenant, the Buffalo Bill character from Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
And it was really cool. I said, man, you are a scary dude, but you seem like a really nice guy. But I never watched that show so much, but with the chase scenes and things like that, I remember the Rock with some of their explosions and the Hulk that was filmed in San Francisco. I think the story's the story, but I think people still see the background and say, oh, I want to go there. I want to go there. But I haven't seen, any really harmful shows based in San Francisco like this. I think it comes down to the storyline. And if you look at some of those, like The Badge or the movie like Training Day, both LA, I think. Yeah. I mean, those would really give a sour connotation to the city. Throughout my career, I've actually, as a patrolman, I actually had site security a couple of times for movies or commercials, things like that. Right. But they usually feature the best parts of San Francisco. I think the Zodiac might have been the only one that really hovered in that area you were talking about, like the Tenderloin with the sort of gritty, dirty area of the city. Mm-hmm. But usually they go to San Francisco for the sights. I think The Rock was one of the greatest ones with whenever somebody, and I'm sorry I missed you when you came to San Francisco because I would have taken you to Alcatraz. It's my favorite place to take out-of-towners. And I've been there easily a dozen times. And I've talked to so many San Franciscans who've never been there, but it's one of my favorite spots and so picturesque.
It's something that's changed in me since being involved with law enforcement the last several years is that now when I'm watching a TV show or a movie and the cops are cannon fodder, that deeply bothers me. I don't think I thought about it before, but that's a common trope in a show that the hero is protected. The hero, he doesn't, every bullet misses him, but just uniformed cops get mowed down by the dozen.
Sure.
And that's something that's bothered me. And then kind of an addendum to that, cops that are just fools and corrupt and that kind of thing, because that's not the type of officer I typically meet. Most of my officers are exceptional. Sure. And yet their representation on TV is that they're all just these jackbooted thugs that are looking for a way to screw you over, and that is another area that offends me. But, No,
I know what you mean. When The Matrix first came out and the ads showed all these cops just getting shot to pieces by the Matrix characters. I was like, how awful is that? But I think, my wife knows I love movies and I take the leap of faith and I just see it for what it is and try to put that off. I know it's fiction, right? One of the things we're watching right now, off the topic of cops being abused, but Madam Secretary. I don't know if you've ever seen that show.
I haven't.
With Tay Leone. And it's really good. It's probably 3 or 4 years since canceled, but it was 7 seasons. And they talk there's some awful comedy in there, but it mostly talks about the Secretary of State office and what they do and deal with behind the scenes and these global events that they're dealing with. And I'll tell you, it's given me a different perspective on when we're reading the morning paper, at breakfast, we get the New York Times and the San Francisco Chronicle. And some of these things that happen in other countries, I'm like, wow, this is real, right? When something that comes up, you can see the direct effect on the United States and how we have to intervene, right?
Yeah. We have a stake in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so those are really good shows for me. I don't watch a lot of cop shows.
That's not uncommon. Yes.
Right. Students ask me, are there any that really relate to policing as real? And I really do think The Wire from Baltimore, 100%. We watched the first season. And I told my wife, gosh, I wish everybody saw this because it is so real. The public housing and the drug dealing and the, enlisting these young kids and their motivation to get out of poverty and all that is so real. Yeah. And the cops' frustration, just as real.
Jim, thank you so much. That was fantastic. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Always great talking to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for what you do. I know you're a big support system for so many in law enforcement. I totally appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Jim mentioned that far too many cops retire and then take all of their great experience and hard-earned wisdom with them. First, thank you, Jim, that you are in the classroom and on your podcast sharing with the next generations of law enforcement officers. Second, that's the central part of what I'm doing here with the Hey Chaplain podcast. I've spent years now hunting for wise cops who are willing to share what they've learned and what they've seen so that I could understand law enforcement better. That helps me out as a police chaplain. The podcast is a way to capture that and share it with 10,000 of my closest friends. The only problem is that there's something like 700,000 cops in America and countless retired cops, soon-to-be cops, and friends and family members of law enforcement. Then you can multiply all of that across multiple countries around the world. So please help me spread this wisdom and experience around to as many police as possible. Tell people about the show. Leave a 5-star rating and a nice review on the podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts. Contact me, and I'll send you a Hey Chaplain magnet to put on the refrigerator at the police station. Buy me a virtual coffee so that I can buy more magnets to put on the refrigerators at all the police stations. I want cops to hear these conversations, and I want them to be healthy both now and after they retire. I believe that this podcast is going to be part of reaching that goal, and I'm thankful to you for helping me out. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
I expect the bad guy to lie to me. And so the first time the bad guy lies about something, they would catch him and say, "You're lying. If you continue to lie to me, I'm going to take you to prison." I could care less about a lie. I just put that in the back of my head while I'm still interviewing and let him tell 3 or 4 or 5 lies. It's okay. I expect to get lied to. And guess what? If the roles were reversed and I was sitting in his spot, I would probably lie too. Little children, we don't teach them to lie. I mean, from day one, they want to point the finger at somebody else or say it wasn't me or it fell on its own. They don't want to admit, yes, Mom and Dad, I'm the one that disobeyed you and I broke this item. Well, the bad guy does the same thing. And so I let him lie, and then I would start bringing out the evidence. I go, yeah, I know you mentioned that. I know that not to be true because of this, this, and this. And so I tell you what, let's start all over again, and let's tell the truth this time.
This show is commercial-free because listeners buy me a $5 virtual coffee at buymeacoffee.com/HeyChaplain. You don't even have to do that. You already get the show for free. But thank you. It really does mean the world to me. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, And as always, pray for peace in our city.